John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. The mastermind of the 9/11 attacks that killed 3,000 people just lost his plea deal that would have spared his life. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and two other defendants initially pled guilty to all charges in exchange for life sentences. But Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin jumped in the 11th hour and revoked that deal, once again potentially putting the death penalty back in play. This is going to be a little different show tonight. We are joined by the man, one of the men, part of the team that represented Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Rodrigo Caruço, formerly a United States Air Force judge advocate who was appointed to represent KSM, part of a team that represented him at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. He is now in private practice in Florida. Rodrigo, thank you for spending some time.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, where do you begin with this story? First of all, when you learn you've been appointed to represent one of the most notorious terrorists the world has ever known, what was your reaction, and did you gladly take the assignment?
The first answer is gladly took the assignment, because that's the job of a military officer and that's the job of a lawyer. My story of September 11th started on September 11th. My father was actually on a flight flying into Chicago, and his flight was deemed missing and presumed lost on that day. And so my interaction began with thinking that the man that I had been detailed to represent attempted to kill my father. And so that was a difficult thing to overcome, but that's the job of being a criminal defense lawyer. And so, you know, when the call comes, you answer it.
Can you describe your interactions with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and just give me some personal sense of who this guy is and how you interacted with him?
Certainly. I will do my best. Of course, I have to maintain any kind of attorney-client communications, my own perceptions. When you get selected to be on the team, you do have to be selected by him. And so I did have interactions with him and got to know Mr. Mohammed on a personal level that you would not really get to know by just being, you know, in the litigation process or just being, you know, his opponent and revered enemy in military trials or in military practice. But I would say that probably the best thing I could describe is if you could imagine capturing and interacting with a senior general from an opposing military force. Let's just use World War II, for example. One of the senior generals of the German army. That would be what you would be interacting with, but on a much more personal level, because what was created, the system that's been created to prosecute him is much different than what existed in, say, the international tribunals after World War II and in tribunals that have happened since.
Well, this is the interesting thing. From the world in which he comes from, the people who would represent you are part of the group trying to put you away. This is a different animal in the United States, which is a great thing, that everybody is afforded a defense. And I know that's the spirit in which you took this on. But he had to be very skeptical of you and all the others on the team who were representing him.
Absolutely. And that's why he did have a pretty decently large criminal defense team. In fact, I won't go into naming names, but it's all public. I would say that the who's who of death penalty litigation in the last 40, 50 years in the United States. But the Military Commissions Act of 2006 and then ultimately 2009, because the Act of 2006 was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States, requires that he have at least one military defense counsel appointed to his case. So he has to have at least one. I was one of two for most of my time on the team. And it is very difficult because I wear the uniform that reminds him of what happened to him between 2003 and 2006, when we disclosed that we actually had him in our possession. And so it was a very difficult obstacle to learn how to overcome, because obviously if I was captured by his force, things might have worked out differently for me. But it is one of the greatest things, and why I love the practice of law and why I love my adopted country, the United States. This is my sworn enemy, and my job given to me by the United States military was to defend his life.
Exactly. And you did. Now, this plea deal that fell apart, can you give us your sense of that now that you're out of it? Is this a just result that Lloyd Austin stepped in and said, we're not going to just sign off on a plea agreement that gives him life in prison? It seems like the pressure from 9/11 families and the outrage from a lot of Americans, they want the death penalty for this guy.
Yes, it is not only unjust, it's also very likely illegal. But after the negotiations and the plea agreement was announced, the administration then jumped in and revoked the
Yes.
authority to enter into these plea agreements, and actually withdrew authority from the convening authority and pulled it up to Secretary Austin's level. Now, the problem with that is there's case law very much on point that says once the process starts and once the defendant has complied with some of the terms of the agreement, the law of contract applies, and you cannot do this. But because of the political outcry of, understandably, a smaller number of the families who do want the death penalty, the political outcry, it is an election year.
Yes, I was going to say that. Okay.
So it was withdrawn within 48 hours of it being agreed to.
Back to KSM. When you first met him, could you soften him up? Did you ever sense any remorse? Because reading some of his language when he was in court testifying during the tribunal, this was conducted in March of '07, he pretty much said, look, I'm a warrior for my cause, just like you're a warrior for your cause, and I do what I do, and this is the language of war. He kept talking about the language of war, that what he was doing was just as a battlefield participant, is how he looked at it.
Exactly. So if you think about any kind of guerrilla kind of warfare, so in the United States, we think that 9/11 started on 9/11. But if you were to talk to those who are involved in what is going on and what has been going on in the Middle East, 9/11 was the latest of a long line of actions. And this was in a line of desperation to fight back, not to start a fight, but to fight back. And you can absolutely disagree, and I certainly also absolutely disagree with that. But you can understand, as a warrior, when your people are being killed, when the United Nations issues a report that says 500,000 Iraqi children died because of the sanctions imposed by the United States on Iraq. When you think about those who are involved in the Palestinian crisis, right or wrong, we can all agree to disagree and understand. And again, I'm a former military officer. I have my side, but you can understand that this is not a terrorist who is trying to, raise the flag over the White House. This is an individual who is trying to protect his community in the way that he tried to get the attention of his opponent. Now, you have to pay for the consequences. You have to pay the consequences of what you do, and that's fine. But my experience with him has been very different than what's been put in the media. In fact, even the picture that we all see of him when he was captured, that picture is not how he was captured. In George Tenet's book, that is public and unclassified, a CIA officer who was there when he was arrested contacted George Tenet, then CIA director, and said, hey, he looks too clean. Can we roughen him up to take a picture to make him look worse for international media?
And that's the picture of him in the white T-shirt where he
looks
disheveled.
Exactly.
This is the image that's been portrayed to the world.
To the world, and that's exactly not how he's looked.
Well, you talked about how he feels that he is promoting his cause just as the United States promotes its cause. And he even quoted, this caught my attention. He said, let's say we're living in the Revolutionary War and George Washington is being arrested through Britain. For sure, they would consider him an enemy combatant. He was trying to flip the entire lens at which we look at this. And I mean, these acts are despicable, but in his mind, this is the language of war.
That's exactly, you've got it exactly right. In fact, when you look at the Revolutionary War, Ben Franklin, at the moment of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, said, "Gentlemen, let's all hang together, because if we don't, we surely will hang separately." Because what they did was an act of treason, and had they been captured by the British, they would have been hanged as enemies of the state for committing treason. It is important to get past what is maybe popularized in media and understand why. Why are they doing this? Why are they trying this? Why did they do this? And I think this is really important with this plea agreement. We would have gotten those answers because the family would have had 45 days to submit questions to each of the three defendants. And they would have had 1 year, I believe it was a year, to answer the questions, why they did it. And it would have been spoken in open court. And so the families would have received closure for these really horrible acts that took the lives of thousands of innocent people.
Before we go to break, I want to get back to just your impressions of him. Could he be charming? Could he be funny? What is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed like? The person not in the picture that we see, but when you interacted with him, your sense of him.
Mr. Mohammed, he's in his 60s now. He's been in American custody for over 20 years. And especially when I met him for the first time, you would imagine a very difficult interaction because, again, I wore the uniform. I had to meet him in uniform. I had to meet him shaved. I had to meet him in, all the things that reminded him of he was waterboarded 187 times. And almost died numerous times. Very warm, very grandfatherly. He is a husband, he's a father, he's a grandfather, he has grandchildren he's never met, but is a very warm individual. In fact,
wow,
based on their conditions, the way that they are, they have the ability to cook in their own cells. And so he cooked for me every day. When I would be down in Guantanamo and we would meet every day, he and his fellow detainees would serve us meals, and it was very important. We talked about fitness a lot. We talked about food a lot. I didn't eat enough for him. If you met him one-on-one, it would be very different. But I think if you spoke to almost any criminal defense attorney, you would probably get a similar explanation.
But it's so interesting to get that perspective. And so he didn't, simply because you're an American and wearing a uniform, view you as an infidel.
He did not. Now, from what I understand, if we go back to 2006, 2007, 2009, things might have been a little bit different. But when I met him, no, not at all. We obviously come from two different religions. Obviously, we are sworn enemies, and the laws of my country allow me to do things. The laws where he comes from allows him to do things, and the law of armed conflict allows us to do things. But it was a very warm experience, one of respect. Again, if you were representing Himmler from the SS, probably would surprise you to be as personal as he was, even though has been charged with doing very serious, very terrible things.
Back with Rodrigo Caruço, who is one of the people on the team that defended Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. Back with Rodrigo Caruço, who is one of the people on the team that defended Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. It's really hard because I think people who listen to this, it's hard to take that perspective because of what happened on 9/11. Do you think he had any remorse? Does he have remorse that so many people were killed and that he was the mastermind of 9/11?
I can tell you from so this is my own perspective. This is not from anything that I've been told. Obviously, I can't disclose anything that I've been told. From my perspective, from what I understand and my views and what I've seen, uh, there is, I think that if this case had been allowed to go to the plea agreements and we would have gone to sentencing so that the families could hear what he has to say, I think what you would hear would be remorse that so many had to die for what was believed to be a wartime decision.
Does he
Unfortunately, we won't get to see that because
Yeah.
the agreements have been pulled back, but I think that's what you would see in that sentencing hearing. And I think the families are being deprived of that because of politics.
Did Khalid Sheikh Mohammed ever tell you whether he wants to live or die? Does he want to spend the rest of his days in a supermax or in Guantanamo, or does he want to be executed?
So I can't reveal anything that he specifically told me. I can say that the two places that he can possibly be housed will be either in Guantanamo until he dies, or in the Supermax in Colorado, which coincidentally his nephew is currently being housed because he was the one who planned the first World Trade Center attacks in 1993.
Right.
And I believe it's in public documents, when he was originally detained and captured, he attempted to plead guilty to the offenses and ask for the death penalty as a warrior. Unfortunately, at the time, and it still exists in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which has been copied over to the Military Commissions Act, you cannot plead guilty to a death penalty offense. You have to be proven guilty.
Something that struck me about the 9/11 hijackers to begin with, they assimilated for a while in the United States, and they were living the good life for the United States, and it seemed unfathomable that they would be interacting with other Americans on a daily basis, getting along with them, interacting with them, working with them, studying with them, and then would turn on them and kill them. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was educated in North Carolina for a time at university. So he did the same thing, that you can mingle with your enemy and then turn with no remorse.
I would agree to a degree. Yes, yeah, he's a trained mechanical engineer, trained through a program that brought immigrants to the United States to study. From what I understand, and it's publicly available, it was a difficult time because I mean, he was, he comes from a part of Pakistan, Baluchistan, that's not formally recognized, has Palestinian roots, and was in the United States in a part of the country that maybe was still adjusting to having folks from that kind of background. He's believed to be connected to the original attacks in terms of funding or financing. At least that's what some of the publications have said. So this is one of those things where you look backwards and you can connect all the dots looking backwards. And yes, they were definitely among us. And if you're looking at day-to-day interactions, it's hard to comprehend how you can live in a society with the mindset that you're going to do something to this society, and that's foreign. I would submit that's what we do in our special operations forces as well. Our Green Berets live in foreign societies with the actual purpose of fomenting local insurrection. Our intelligence community lives in foreign communities with the intention of causing local citizens to commit espionage and sabotage of their own country. It's easier when it's easier to talk about when you're distanced from it. When it hits home is when it really gets hard to talk about. And that's why I think this is so hard, is because you can't really have a regular conversation about 9/11 without dealing with the fact that over 3,000 Americans died.
Yeah.
In the most grotesque way, and in a really grotesque way. And I say that saying that I believe that on 9/11, my father was one of those people who was killed. So it is hard to get past that, to talk about the whys, and you're not trying to make it make anything equal, but just, to even at least have some kind of understanding, it's hard
No,
because
it
it's
is. This you've got to really suspend some strong emotion to look at it, try to look at it
absolutely.
rationally, and it's not easy to do. Can I ask you, final thing, Rodrigo, what did you learn from interacting with him? And maybe beyond that, how worried are you that this kind of thing could happen again?
I learned the worst of us and the very best of us during my time studying this case and being involved in this case. After September 11th, 2001, the United States had to make some decisions. And I think they were made in the best intentions to protect the country. And we understood the consequences of the decisions that we had to make. And we weren't shown the best light. And there's, lots of evidence about that. There are people who have been killed in our custody, died in our custody, Abu Ghraib. There's a bunch of those things. But on the flip side, I learned the very best of the United States. This is why this is the greatest country that's ever existed in the history of the world, because this is a country who was forced to go to war with a sworn enemy and has spent over $6 billion to protect the life of that enemy so that they get a fair shake. And if I was captured and had been put in their system, I would not be here today. And people I served with and people that shared the same uniform have shared that fate. And
Do you
and
think
many others have
KSM
too.
appreciated that? Did he come to some revelations about the United States?
If if you don't know somebody who suffered something and then you meet that person who has suffered, it changes your opinion. So by me meeting him, it really gave me insight into a different perspective I've read about, I've studied, but never really truly experienced. And on the flip side, I believe over time, the United States became more than just the United States that in that perspective oppresses and individuals and supports oppressive regimes in their perspective. And once they meet individuals who are from there, for example, me and others like me who have worked to overcome that obstacle. There was many civilian attorneys from the American Civil Liberties Union, from the John Adams Project that have been on the case a lot longer than me, who have really worked to earn his trust. And I think that shows it. You can't really generalize anything. And so I think there's been some learning. I hope there has been for me, there has been from everyone that I've known that have been on the teams. There were 5 teams, now there's 4 teams because one had been removed from the case. And then there's additional teams who are on some death penalty cases, the USS Cole case, for example. I think there's been a lot of learning that has happened. What's us going to do in the long run, I don't know. But individually, yes, I do think that having that personal exposure has really opened eyes on both sides to different cultures that are, I think, trying to exist, but are just caught up in things that are beyond our individual control that we just have to learn how to handle and deal with.
Yeah, the ambiguities of war. Depends which side you're on, I guess.
Right.
Wow, that was very interesting. Rodrigo Caruço, formerly United States Air Force judge, and represented Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I sure appreciate your time. That was very interesting.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for getting the word out and sharing the story. I think this is a story that 9/11 is receded from the American memory, except for those who fought in Iraq and in Afghanistan and other parts of the world.
And the families.
And so by continuing to tell the story, tell the family story, tells our service members' story, and keeps that story alive, because it's not over for a lot of us. And so I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're back in a minute on Newsmaker. Thanks as always for being with us on Newsmaker, and we will see you next week on Newsmaker.